Citing sources in APA style. There are a number of different formats in which you can cite your sources, include them in a reference list, making sure that everyone can access those sources that you've used in your assignment or your paper. In this video, we're going to focus on the APA style, or the American Psychological Association style. This includes lots of ways that you'll format the paper in general, but this will really focus on those citations and references rather than the physical formatting of the paper from start to finish. In this video, I'll give an introduction to citations and references. I'll give some really clear examples of the two most common formats that you'll be likely to use. And I'll include a lot of resources for continued practice and reference and some things that you'll really want to take advantage of as you get used to using this style and citing your sources in this way. First, we'll go over an introduction to citations and references. Before we really dive in, we need to know the purpose of citations. There are four big reasons that you need to cite sources. The first is to let your readers know where you got this information. It gives you a little bit more credibility if they understand that the sources you're relying on are high quality, reliable, and relevant to the work that they're reading that you worked so hard on. Second, it allows your readers to return to your source. So if they read something in your work that seems really interesting and they'd like to follow up a little bit more and see what the initial source said about it, then they'll be able to do so. It's a bit of a roadmap so that they can find it again. The third purpose is to help your readers determine if they agree with your evaluation. You won't just be citing a source, but will be using it in support or against an argument that you're making, or in support of further evidence that you're demonstrating. And sometimes your readers will want to know if they agree with your interpretation and what you've said about this original source. And so this gives them the opportunity to take a look more closely. And finally, it provides credit to those who created the information originally. They worked hard on it, just as you're working hard on your assignments and your research papers. And so providing credit is a really nice way to demonstrate how we each rely on each other's hard work and information creation. Now, citing sources is really a two-step process. There are two parts to any citation. The first is what we call an in-text or parenthetical citation. And this is a quick reference to the source that you're discussing at that point in your paper. And it immediately lets readers know where you got that information from. It's also a little roadmap to the reference list, which is the second part of this process. The full reference list includes full references, lots more information about each and every source that you're citing in your paper. And it's where your readers will find enough information that they can actually get back to that original source. So the in-text citation quickly lets them know basically where you got the information, and it gives them an ability to find more information that will let them find the actual source in the reference list. So they'll then go to the end of your paper, see that comprehensive list of your information sources, pull out the one that they were interested in from that in-text citation, and then that will give them enough information to actually go search their own information resources, databases, what have you, and find that original article, book, or other source. I mentioned that the reference list includes a lot more information that will be important for your reader to find that original source. So what is all of that information that they'll need? Here are the standard parts of most references. It will include the author or who created that information, the date that the information was published. That's often the date that a journal issue was published, the date that a book was published, the title of the publication, and that is often an article title or a book title. the title of a larger work, if that's applicable. So for instance, an article is typically part of a journal. So the title of publication would be the title of the article itself, and the title of the larger work would be the title of the journal in which that article is published. Many sources will have this kind of additional layer where there's a small section that you're really citing and a larger work that holds that smaller piece of information, but others won't have it. So for instance, books will typically just be the title of the publication and simply not have any larger work that it's part of. There will also be details of finding the publication. That might include the issue number, the volume number, the page numbers if it's a print periodical, any other information that will be essential for your readers to find that piece of information. And finally, if this is a source that it's digital or that you find online, you may include a link to access it. For many publications, like journal articles, that's what we call a DOI. We use the DOI link to access that again. And if it's a web source, then you would use the URL so that somebody would be able to get back to it. The important thing is that that link is current, it's stable, so whoever clicks on it will be brought to the work immediately, that it's not outdated, that it hasn't been changed or updated since the time that you cited the source. So for the in-text citations, and remember those are the citations right in the meat of your paper, right when you're actually talking about that source, those will point people to the larger reference list to get all of that information. And the standard parts of the in-text citation are much more pared down, so it doesn't take up a lot of room in the body of your paper. Those standard parts of the in-text citations are the author. That's usually just the last name of the author, and the date of publication. So it could be Smith 2019, for example. That way your readers will know to go into the reference list, look for a work by the author Smith, verify that it's the correct publication by matching up that publication date between the in-text citation and the reference list, and then they'll be able to look at more information to find that source. This also allows you to have multiple publications, potentially by the same author, or perhaps an author with the same name as another author. So for instance, you might cite Smith 2018 and Smith 2019. So including that date of publication does help you make sure that you're getting the right publication when you go into that reference list. There are a few things to know as you get started with your citations. The first is that the format does adjust to the information that you actually have. So there will be times that you don't have all of the information. The information simply doesn't exist that a format might call for. For instance, it may have a volume number, but not an issue number. It may have a URL if it's a web source or a source that lives digitally, but it also may be a print source that does not have a URL. In each of these cases, you include the information that you do have, and you can leave out the information that simply isn't relevant to that source. The second note here is that there are different formats depending on the type of source. So journal articles will be a slightly different format than a print book, which will be a bit different than a website, which is a bit different than a video. They'll all have some really common themes and common formats between them, but the specifics will be a little bit different, really because the information that you need in order to access each type of source will differ a little bit, and so it takes that into account. Remember that the goal of this is for your reader to have access to the information that you're citing. So as long as you're really keeping that in mind, making sure that you're providing them with a roadmap to how to get to the information, that they have the information that they need, that it's clear to them how to follow that roadmap, then you're doing a good job with your citations. There will be times when it's not perfectly clear exactly what format to use or exactly what information, but you can always take a little step back and just ask yourself, will they be very clear about what type of source this is, how to get to it, and have the information at hand so that they will successfully get to the source. The fourth point here is that these do get complicated, but remember that practice helps. I don't expect you at the end of this video to suddenly be an expert at citing every kind of source. This will give you a little background, a little bit of practice, and then as you do this, you will get better. So don't worry about being perfect right from the get-go. And finally, there are a lot of resources that can help you generate citations. I'm going to show you a few of those really important things to know about at the end of this video so that you'll be able to take advantage of those online options so you're not creating every reference completely by hand from scratch each time. A quick example of the kind of workflow that you'll tend to follow as you collect information and cite it is that first you're going to identify the type of source, whether that's article, book, video, etc. You'll look up the format for that source. You don't need to know the format for every kind of source right off the top of your head. You'll take note as you look at that format of what information you're going to need in order to properly cite that source, and then gather the information you need in order to do that citation. So perhaps that's gathering the URL, the author name, the date of publication, just so that you have that right at hand. Then you'll fill in the information to create the reference itself, following the format for that type of source. That will be the full reference, and from that you can easily create that in-text citation by including the author and the date. Now here we'll get into some of the specifics of how you actually create references and in-text citations for a couple of different common formats. This will really go into the journal article format and the book format. We'll touch a little bit in a few minutes on the web format as well, but these will probably be the two most common formats that you use. Let's get started with the reference for a journal article. I got this really great illustration from the APA website, and that's apastyle.apa.org. You can see the full URL at the bottom of this slide here. And I really like this because it shows you the standard format for just about any journal article, and each section of it, each bit of meaning that you include in the reference is highlighted in a different color, so you can kind of see how those different parts are put together. Off of each section, you'll also see a little bit extra description. So let's go through this and see exactly what's included and how to include it. The first section is who wrote the article. That's the list of authors. If there are multiple authors, you include many of the authors. There are some situations where you may need to cut that off, but it's quite a high number. So in most cases, you include all of the authors. You list them as last name, comma, initials. If there are more than one author, then you include an ampersand between the two authors. And if there's three or more, then you only use that ampersand between the last two authors. Otherwise, they're just separated by commas. So for example, here we see that we have the author's last name, comma, and then first initial, period, space, second initial, if they have it, period, comma, and then go on to the next author. This is not italicized, and at the end, you simply end with that final period. Then you go into the year of the publication. If you have additional information like the season or the month, you can also include that. Again, this is not italicized, and it's in parentheses. You end it with a period outside of the parentheses. Next, we get to the title of the article itself. This may be quite lengthy. Many research articles do have lengthy titles. What you'll see here is that, again, it's not italicized, and we use what we call sentence case. That means that the first letter of the first word is capitalized, but the other words are left in lowercase. So you don't need to capitalize the first letter of each word, only that first word. The exception is that if there are any proper nouns, then you do include the capital letter for that proper noun. just as you would in any sentence that you were writing. You end the title of the article with a period. Next, you include the name of the periodical. That's the journal title that the article appears within. This you do italicize, and we move out of sentence case so that we're capitalizing the first letter of each word, other than those small words such as of or the. So in this example, name of the periodical capitalizes the N in name and the P in periodical. You then end that with a comma. Then you include the information of the volume and issue numbers. Now, this is one of those cases where you may not have an issue number. If the journal publishes by volume number and does not number issues within that, then you simply leave that information out. You only include what you do have. You do italicize the volume number, and if you have the issue number, that is not italicized, and you include it inside parentheses with a comma outside of the parentheses. Next, you list the page numbers that the article follows, so those are the pages within that volume or within that issue. You don't need to include anything like a P or the word pages to describe that it's pages. This is one of those cases where your reader will simply know that those are the page numbers because they're familiar with the citation format. You would put a dash between those numbers to indicate that it's a range of pages, and you finish it with a period. Finally, if the article includes a DOI, that's the digital object identifier, then you include that URL for that article. It typically is doi.org/ a series of numbers and letters that is a unique identifier for that article. If it does not have a DOI, if it has just a stable URL that points people to the open web where they can find that article, then you can include that. But nearly every article that appears in a periodical that you'll be using will include a DOI, and that's the URL that you use. It's important to note that if you find an article within one of our databases, don't include the URL that's simply listed at the top of that page, because it will only work for you or for somebody who's within this institution. We do want to find that DOI because that means that readers outside of the institution would also be able to find that same article. Now let's take a quick look at a couple examples of how a journal article might appear, both in the reference list and in the in-text citation. In the first example, we see a list of authors. We have their last name, comma, first initial. In this case, they don't seem to use middle initials, so there's only that first initial for each. And we see the ampersand in between the last two authors. Then we see that it was published in 2020. We see the title of the article itself, Timing Matters, explaining between study phases enhances students' learning. You can see that that's in sentence case and that it is not italicized. It does appear in the Journal of Educational Psychology, volume 112, issue 4, pages 841 to 853, and there's the link to the DOI. Now, take note that this format is just slightly off. That third line of the reference should be indented to be in line with the word explaining right above it. That's simply an error in formatting. For this article, you could do an in-text citation by listing the first author's last name, et al., because it includes multiple authors. You don't need to list all of them in an in-text citation, just that first one, and then an indication that there are more authors, comma, the year of publication, 2020. You can also actually write out the information in a more of a narrative format. So if you prefer to that parenthetical citation, you can do the in-text citation by saying, as Lochner et al. Stated in their 2020 study, and then go on to quote them or paraphrase the information. What you really need to make sure of is that that author is included and the date of publication is included. That's really the essential part. Another example, we see another article listed here. We have the author's names. Here there are only two, and so there's an ampersand between them. It was published in 2019. The title of the article is Data and Experience Design, Negotiating Community-Oriented Digital Research with Service Learning. The publication is Purdue Journal of Service Learning and International Engagement. Again, that third line should be indented to be in line with oriented above it. Volume 6, Issue 1, pages 11 to 16, and the DOI. Again, you can see the parenthetical citation, Bania and Weech, 2019, and a slight variation on how you could include that information in the narrative form. You might only include the author's names and then keep the date in parentheses. As Bania and Weech note, you can include the information there. And at the end, parenthetically, 2019. However you do it, just make sure that you include all of the necessary information. Now let's take a quick look at how you would do the same type of reference for a book. You'll see that this is very similar to the format for an article. They don't reinvent the wheel for every different type of source. They just adjust it a little bit for the type of information you'll have, what your readers will need to find that source. Again, the list of authors is the same as it would be for a journal. The year is specifically the copyright year. You often find that on the title page. The title of the book is essentially a combination here of the title of the article and the publication title. We do use sentence case. Again, that means first letter of first word and any proper nouns. So that's like the article title. But then we do italicize this as we do for the publication name. That's part of how your readers will know that this is a book that they're looking at because of the way you formatted it. If this is a particular edition of the book, you'll include that after the title in parentheses, not italicized. Then you'll include the publisher name. Again, you'll probably find that either on the title page or the copyright information page. And then if the book appears in a digital format, if you can find it online or if it's an ebook, then you do include the DOI or other URL where you would find it. Many books will not have this, so you don't need to include it if it's a purely print book. However, I'll note that for both books and articles, if it ever appears in a digital format, you do include the URL. So even if you looked at a print article or a print book and there is an online edition of it that's identical, simply not the format you were reading it in, then you do include that URL even though you were reading it in print. So just a quick note there. If a URL exists, use it. And again, we can take a look at two examples of a book reference. And here you can see the formatting is correct for those indentations. So you have the first line of the reference at the margin of the page, and additional lines will be indented. Here we have a book that was written by 3 authors. They do use both the first and middle initials. It was copyrighted in 2018. The title of the book is Mindful Sport Performance Enhancement, Mental Training for Athletes and Coaches. The publisher was the American Psychological Association, and there is a DOI available for it, so it's listed here. You'll notice those URLs or DOIs are always listed as links so that people can click on it and that it's formatted in this way that looks like a link. For the in-text citation, Kaufman et al. 2018, or Kaufman et al. Wrote that, include the quotation there, and then parenthetically perhaps 2018. The second example, this book was written by Stoneman, R. It was copyrighted in 2008. It was titled Alexander the Great, A Life in Legend. It was published by Yale University Press, and it does not have an associated URL, so this one is quite short. And again, in text citation, Stoneman, 2008, or Stoneman's 2008 explanation of Alexander the Great included perhaps a paraphrase or quotation there. So you can do these in-text citations either parenthetically or as part of the narrative, or a little bit of both. Now take note, you do include only the information that does exist. You don't need to create information to match the format. You just gather what does exist. As I mentioned, you include all of the authors, up to 19 of them. If there are more than 19 authors, then after the 18th, instead of having that ampersand like you would at the end of a standard list, you would have an ellipsis, that ... before the final author. So we'll know that some are missing from your reference, but we clearly have enough information to find that article at that point. So author 1, author 2, author 3, author 4, ... and then the final author. Always include that DOI or URL, even if you accessed it in print. If there is a DOI or URL, use it. Don't include information about the database. So for example, if you pulled information from EBSCO, from CINAHL, something like that, don't include the database information. The exception to that is if you use a database like UpToDate, where that is the only place that actually has that information. Most databases collect information that already exists. UpToDate really creates that on its own platform. So in that case, the URL that you would use to access it really would be an UpToDate URL as opposed to a DOI or other information. And of course, when you're linking, make sure those links are current and work. In the current edition of APA, web sources are a bit of a catch-all miscellaneous category. So if possible, don't just default to the web source format if you have something that you accessed online, like a website or video. If it's a news periodical that's hosted online, you'll use the format for a news periodical. If it's a report that's hosted online, use the format for a report. Similarly, if it's a video that you found online, use the format for video. If it's really none of those, if it's more of a miscellaneous web source, then you'll default to using the web source format. Do make sure that you include the URL, that's especially important. If it's a web source that is regularly updated and they're not archiving those previous versions, then include the note at the end that it was retrieved on a specific date. If it's an article that really is published on a particular day, then you don't need to include the retrieved on information because we know when it was published by that publication date. If it has been archived and is no longer available on the standard website, use the archive link. That will not be the case very often, but just a note that if you need to use former web pages and you have those archived, you'll include that archive link instead of the original link where it was originally published. And again, you only use the web source format if nothing else fits and you found it on the open web. Now, so far we've gone through a lot of information about some very specific, particular formats, and I've kind of referenced that web sources and other formats also exist. Let's dive into some of the resources that you'll be relying on to get some practice and to refer to as you create references. First, the American Psychological Association website is where I got a lot of this information. It includes webinars that go well in depth on many more details than I have here. They have lots of examples. They have some really useful checklists to use as well as you create references, so check that out. They also have the specific 7th edition APA style book. We have that in the library, so you can come in and refer to that if you prefer using a print book. It has lots of information that will be helpful as you create your references. And finally, there's another source which is not associated with APA, but is really quite standard for people to use as they create citations. That's the Purdue Online Writing Lab, or what they call the Purdue OWL. They have lots of information on many formats and lots of examples, so I recommend that as well. There are also lots of ways to get some hands-on practice with these formats before you actually need to create references and citations for your assignments. I really recommend the APA website for this. Specifically, their Scaffolded Reference Elements worksheet, where they help you put together all of those different pieces of information into the right format. The journal article reference checklist to make sure that you're including all the most important information that you need to in each reference. The in-text citation checklist, which is similar but for the in-text citations. And they have a Test Your APA Style Knowledge quiz, which is a great way to get a little bit more practice. I also alluded before to some citation generators that will be helpful. These are actually built in to many of the online resources that we provide through the library. If you're searching, Search It, which is our discovery service where you search one search bar and it looks at many different databases, then you can actually click the Cite This Item button and it will pull up the APA citation right there. So if you find an article, you're looking at the information about the article, then click Cite This Item, select APA 7th edition, and take a look at that citation. Now, there's a big caveat here. They will only be as good in these citations as the information that was put into the system. This will often get you about 95% of the way there, but you'll still need to be familiar enough with these formats to make sure that it's all the way 100% correct. Now, in this case, this is a little bit incorrect. This is listing nursing as the author because there were no authors listed in the online information about this article. If you actually go into the article, though, you would see that there are authors. They just weren't put in a way that this system could pull it out. So you would need to put in those author names and move the title nursing to where it would appear as the article title before the journal title. So there's an example. It gets you most of the way there, but you'll need to do a little extra legwork to get it just right. There's similar functionality in any of our EBSCO databases, and really any of our databases for the most part. Here's an example of CINAHL, which is an EBSCO database. And over on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side of this left image is a button that says Cite. I've highlighted it here in yellow. It will pull up a list of different formats under citation format, and you'll just scroll to the point where it says APA 7th edition, and here's a full reference for it. Here you'll see it looks like their information is fairly complete. You can see the author, publication date, article title, journal title, volume and issue numbers, page numbers, and the DOI. Remember, make sure that DOI link works when you put it into your references, that it's not outdated or that there's not another issue with it. One final example of these generation activities options in our databases. Here's an example from PubMed. On this page with information about this article, you'll see a button on the right-hand side that says Cite. That will pull up a pop-up window with the citation, and here you'll pull from a drop-down menu which format you want. Make sure it's that APA format if that's what you're looking for. You can then copy and paste it into your reference list. Here's just a quick tip to help you be successful as you're finding information, collecting it, getting ready to use it. Collect those references as you find them. Use that Cite button, copy and paste that directly into your document or whatever you're using to track your citations or your references, your sources. It's simply really disheartening to have found a great source and end up not remembering where you found it, what it was titled, and then have trouble finding it again. So make sure that if you're finding a source that looks like it might be useful to you, go ahead and save that information so you can get back to it. Finally, please know that you are not adrift and alone trying to create these citations. We have campus resources to help you. So now you have some basic information about how to create these source references, why you're doing that, some in-depth examples for a couple of the most common formats, and how you'll find those citations within our online databases. But it doesn't stop there. Of course, as you're getting practice, as you're figuring this out, as you're making sure that your in-text citations are properly referring to your references, which properly refer to the original source, we can help. WSU Spokane Writing Support is a fantastic option for you so that you can make an appointment and get some assistance with your citations. The Spokane Academic Library has a page online on writing help and citation formats so that you can get a little bit more assistance that way. And there's the WSU Plagiarism Information website. And of course, the flip side to doing a great job with citing your sources and pointing people to where you get your information is that if you haven't done that, then that is a case where it's an issue of plagiarism and not providing attribution for your sources. So this website actually gives some really fantastic information for avoiding that, making sure that you're doing a good job citing your sources, and also just some great information more on why we cite beyond avoiding that plagiarism. Really, it's a fantastic opportunity to be part of the knowledge creation community, and this is a great opportunity for you to be part of it. So know that you're not alone. Take advantage of these resources. Contact me as well so that I can help you with finding your sources, getting those citations gathered, and we wish you the best of luck in citing your sources.